The tale begins in feudal-era Japan, in a remote province known as Akko, where warlords still rule with absolute authority. One day, a group of samurai arrive carrying a strange captive, a pale-skinned boy found wandering alone in the wilderness. The child calls himself Kai, but no one knows where he came from. His ghostly appearance unsettles the people, and whispers spread that he might be cursed, or worse, something not entirely human. Most of the villagers want him driven out, fearing disaster if he stays. But the land's ruler, Lord Asano, chooses compassion over superstition. Against the advice of his retainers, he allows the boy to remain in the domain. Asano's young daughter, Mika, is immediately drawn to Kai's quiet nature, and the two form a bond that will last for years. Kai grows up within Akko's walls, but never truly belongs. He lives on the fringes of society, shunned by nearly everyone except Lord Asano and Mika. Despite the cruelty he endures, Kai never forgets that he was shown mercy when no one else would offer it. Years later, the peace of the region is shattered by rumors of a monstrous creature terrorizing nearby villages. Hunters speak of a gigantic beast with multiple eyes and strength great enough to snatch horses off the ground. A group of warriors ventures out to track it down. During the hunt, a samurai named Asano is separated from the others. His sword slips from his grasp, and he finds himself frozen in fear as the creature approaches. At the last moment, Kai charges in, fighting with reckless bravery. Against all odds, he slays the monster and saves Asano's life, even returning the fallen warrior's blade. Instead of gratitude, Asano responds with hatred. Disgusted, he mutters that he would rather have died than be rescued by someone impure. When the rest of the warriors arrive, they assume Asano defeated the beast himself. Asano does nothing to correct them and accepts their praise in silence. As Kai departs, he notices a white fox watching him from the shadows. Its eyes are mismatched, one light, one dark. The moment lingers uneasily. Elsewhere in the neighboring territory of Nagato, the very same fox appears before Lord Kira. In a flash of supernatural light, the animal transforms into a beautiful woman. She is revealed to be Kira's covert agent, and she reports that their previous scheme to undermine Lord Asano has failed. Back in Akko, Mika rushes to greet her father after the hunt. When she asks if he is injured, Asano jokingly asks whether she is worried about someone in particular. The reason for the monster hunt soon becomes clear. Akko has been chosen to host the upcoming Shogun's Tournament, a prestigious event where rival domains display their finest warriors. Everything must be flawless. Asano praises Mika's dedication in preparing for the ceremony and tells her that her late mother would be proud. That evening, Mika secretly visits Kai, who is badly wounded from the battle. She tends to his injuries and thanks him for his courage. She also mentions noticing shame in Asano's eyes while everyone celebrated him. Kai realizes she understands the truth. He asks her not to involve herself, insisting that trouble will only follow. Quietly, he admits that he cares for her deeply, but their worlds are too far apart. The day of the shogun's arrival finally comes, accompanied by lavish ceremonies and performances. Among the guests is a mysterious woman whose mismatched eyes immediately unsettle Kai. Recognizing the same gaze as the fox from the forest, he grows alarmed. Kai confides his suspicions to Lord Asano's chief retainer, Oishi, unaware that Oishi's young son, Shikara, overhears them. Kai warns that a witch walks among them. Oishi responds that only demons or spirits can perceive such beings in their true form, and questions how Kai could possibly know this. Soon after, Lord Kira arrives in Akko, wearing a courteous smile that barely masks his hostility toward Asano. He makes a deliberately insulting comment about Mika, implying she is merely a concubine. Enraged, Asano corrects him, declaring Mika is his daughter and must be addressed with respect. The tournament's main event approaches, a duel between champions from the two domains. Kira's chosen warrior displays remarkable skill, drawing admiration from the crowd. In contrast, Asano's champion is expected to be Asano, the supposed slayer of the monster, but Asano never appears. Instead, the white fox woman visits him in secret. When Shikara goes to summon Asano, he finds him weakened, shaken, and clearly unfit to fight. Kai urges Oishi to choose another competitor, but protocol forbids it. If Asano's warrior fails to appear, the humiliation will be catastrophic. Only a true samurai may enter the match. Neither Kai nor Oishi qualifies. Then a dangerous possibility emerges. Tournament fighters wear full armor and masks. No one will know who stands behind the helmet, and someone must step forward. The crowd grows restless as time drags on with no sign of Akko's champion. Murmurs ripple through the stands. Finally, the shogun sends an attendant to Lord Asano with a simple but ominous question. "Where is your warrior?" Before Asano can answer, a lone figure steps into the arena wearing Akko's armor. His arrival lacks spectacle, but relief spreads through the spectators. At least a fighter has shown up. That small comfort doesn't last long. Kira's champion attacks immediately, overwhelming Akko's warrior with ruthless efficiency. The masked fighter is driven backward, barely able to defend himself. Then an arrow strikes his helmet, knocking the mask clean off. Gasps echo across the arena. The fallen fighter is Kai. The shogun signals for the duel to stop and descends from his platform. One glance tells him everything. Kai is not a samurai. Enraged by the deception, the shogun orders Kira's warrior to execute him on the spot. Mika screams and throws herself in front of Kai, shielding him with her body. Lord Asano steps forward and bows deeply. He accepts full responsibility for what has happened. If punishment is required, Asano says, let it fall upon me. The shogun considers this, then declares that the matter will be judged by those present. The tournament is suspended, and tension hangs heavy in the air. That evening, within Lord Kira's residence, the shape-shifting witch explains her true strategy. She tells Kira that Asano is already under immense pressure and emotionally vulnerable. Now is the perfect moment to break him completely. To demonstrate her power, she conjures a grotesque spider, its body bearing 6 glowing eyes, identical to the beast that once terrorized the villages. The truth becomes clear. The earlier monster was her creation. The spider crawls toward Asano and bites his lip, injecting a potent toxin. Soon after, Asano begins to hallucinate. In his distorted vision, he sees Lord Kira attacking Mika. Panicked and furious, Asano draws his sword and rushes forward to defend his daughter. In reality, he strikes toward Kira. Samurai restrain Asano before he can land a fatal blow, while Kira theatrically pretends to be an innocent victim. Because Asano has attacked a visiting lord, the law demands his execution. However, in recognition of his rank and honor, he is granted the right to end his own life. Later, Asano speaks privately with Oishi. He says this fate is preferable to public disgrace. Oishi protests, insisting that Asano was bewitched and bears no true guilt, but Asano is concerned only with preserving his family's honor. He bids farewell to Mika, telling her not to shed tears in front of their enemies. Strength, he says, is the final gift she can give him. In a quiet place, Oishi prepares Asano's blade, cleaning it with reverence. Kai, still badly wounded, is unable to attend. The remaining retainers stand witness as Lord Asano meets his end. Grief and rage boil among the samurai, and many demand immediate vengeance. Oishi restrains them, reminding everyone that reckless action would bring devastation upon innocent villagers and farmers. A true warrior, he says, must think first of the people. Mika petitions the shogun, declaring that as Asano's only heir, she will govern the land until marriage. But the decision has already been made. The shogun announces that Lord Kira will now control Akko. Mika is granted 1 year of mourning, after which she will become Kira's bride. Oishi and the remaining warriors are stripped of their titles. They are declared Ronin, masterless samurai, and forbidden from seeking revenge. Once Kira takes power, he wastes no time enforcing his rule. He expels the Ronin from the domain and orders their execution should any return. Kai is dragged before Kira in chains. Kira coldly tells Mika to look at him carefully because this will be the last time she ever sees him. Kira also has Oishi arrested, unwilling to trust him. Oishi is thrown into prison, where he remains for an entire year. When he is finally released during a violent rainstorm, he is weak, dirty, and half-starved. His wife and son rush to him, bringing warm food and clothing. They tell him that most of their people have fled Akko. Mika has been taken to Kira's castle in preparation for her forced marriage, which is now close at hand. Oishi asks about Kai. Shikara reveals that Kai was sold into slavery far away. Hearing this, Oishi realizes the truth. Kira believes him broken and harmless. That illusion is their only advantage. Oishi demands 3 horses immediately. His wife begs him not to go, but he tells her to spread word that they are divorced. It is the only way to protect her and their son from Kira's retaliation. He says goodbye, gives final instructions to Shikara, and rides off alone. After a long and brutal search, Oishi finds Kai in a nightmare existence. Kai has been forced to fight in underground pits for the amusement of addicts and criminals. His body is scarred, his spirit hollow. Oishi enters the pit as a challenger because it is the only way to get close to him. But the year of torture has changed Kai. When Oishi speaks his name, Kai shows no recognition. He is no longer a man, only a weapon. Oishi keeps repeating his name, trying desperately to reach the man in front of him. It's me. Look at me, but Kai doesn't respond. He attacks again and again, moving purely on instinct. There is no thought behind his blows, no recognition in his eyes. It's as if his body still exists, but his spirit has been hollowed out by months of abuse. Only one word breaks through the fog. Mika. The moment her name is spoken, Kai hesitates, his fists lower. his eyes slowly regain focus. Using that brief clarity, Oishi and Kai fight their way out of the pit, weaving through gunfire and chaos. They escape into the night, battered but alive. Once they are safe, Oishi finally speaks to Kai as an equal. Kai is no longer the quiet, obedient outcast he once was. Anger now fuels his words. Pain has sharpened his voice. Oishi admits his greatest failure. I should have trusted you about the witch. He now understands that Lord Kira engineered Asano's downfall through sorcery. Oishi also explains that his year in prison has stripped away his old illusions about honor and order. Survival and justice now matter more than blind obedience. For the first time, Oishi bows his head to Kai. He needs his help. News soon reaches Kira's castle. The enslaved warrior sold to foreign traders has escaped, with assistance from a former samurai. Kira immediately orders the witch to locate Oishi. He wants Oishi erased before any rebellion can take shape. Meanwhile, Kai and Oishi arrive at a secluded pond where Shikara waits with a small gathering of scattered Ronin. Shikara reveals that he has secretly reunited many of Oishi's former men. Oishi lays out the truth. Their plan violates the shogun's decree. Anyone who joins will be signing their own death warrant. When Oishi states their objective, Lord Kira's execution, the group erupts with fierce determination. Every man agrees to follow him. They begin gathering intelligence. Kira's fortress is heavily guarded, so they must learn the exact date of his next temple visit. They also need weapons. Oishi assigns teams to different tasks. One Ronin angrily confronts Kai, snarling that he is not a samurai. Oishi steps between them. Neither are you, he says. None of us are samurai anymore. The teams split up. Oishi, Kai, and Shikara travel to Yutsu, a village known for forging swords. When they arrive, the settlement feels abandoned. Doors open. Forges cold, no sign of life. They soon encounter patrol soldiers. Oishi claims they are farmers looking to purchase tools. The soldiers scoff, declaring that Yutsu now belongs to Lord Kira. One guard eyes Shikara's hands and remarks that they look nothing like a farmer's. Kai senses danger. He attacks without hesitation. In seconds, several soldiers are dead. The rest flee in terror. The Ronin collect fallen blades, but the message is clear. Kira controls the entire region. No village will openly supply them. That is when Kai reveals the truth about his past. He knows of another place, a forbidden forest where spirits dwell, a place where weapons can still be found. He swears he will never rely on the supernatural power he once received there. Oishi is deeply uneasy at the mention of ghosts, but desperation leaves him no alternatives. They will go to the forest. Elsewhere, one of Oishi's scouts returns with information about Kira's movements. On his way back, he encounters a striking woman with mismatched eyes. Mesmerized, he stops to speak with her, unknowingly falling into danger. At the forest's edge, Kai warns the Ronin that the northern path leads straight into hostile territory. The air feels heavy, unnatural. Only Kai and Oishi enter a narrow cave while the others remain outside. Whatever you see, Kai says, do not draw your sword. Outside, some of the Ronin whisper among themselves. They distrust Kai. They fear he may betray Oishi. Their suspicion grows. They decide they will enter the cave as well, directly disobeying orders. Inside the depths, Kai ventures alone into an inner chamber. A strange figure appears, neither fully human nor fully spirit. The being speaks calmly, telling Kai how the outside world always treated him as filth, how people called him cursed, how he was rejected without ever being understood. But here, among spirits, he was never judged. Here he belonged. In the outer chamber, Oishi suddenly sees his men collapsing one by one, struck down by invisible forces. Terror spreads. Asano, gripped by panic, draws his blade. A whisper echoes inside Oishi's mind. Draw your sword, save them. Oishi tries to intervene barehanded, fighting unseen enemies, but more men fall. Back in the inner chamber, Kai discovers a powerful sword embedded between stone and bone. The spirit tells him, you may take it, but only if you seize it before I do. Both Kai and the spirit launch forward at the same instant. Kai moves faster. The spirit smiles, pleased that Kai still possesses unmatched speed. At that exact moment, the illusion shatters. The cave stands silent. None of Oishi's men ever entered. No one was dying. Everything Oishi witnessed was a vision, an elaborate test. The entire ordeal inside the spirit cave was a trial, a test of Oishi's loyalty, resolve, and faith in Kai. When Kai finally emerges, he is carrying multiple finely forged swords. Proof that he has passed the spirit's challenge. Soon, the Ronin regroup beyond the borders of Akko. Among them is Isegai, who brings urgent news. Lord Kira is scheduled to leave the temple later that night. Oishi accepts the message without noticing something unsettling. Isegai's eyes appear strangely clouded. Shikara insists on joining the assault, but Oishi refuses. He orders his son to remain behind under the care of an elderly guardian. Night falls, the Ronin move toward what they believe is their moment of vengeance. Inside the castle grounds, a lone figure with long flowing hair performs a ritual, facing away from the approaching attackers. When Oishi steps closer, the figure turns. It is the witch. With a flick of her hand, flames erupt across the area. Explosions tear through the formation. Many Ronin are killed instantly. Others suffer devastating injuries. Within the castle, the witch presents Lord Kira with a sword, revealing that it once belonged to Oishi, a cruel reminder of defeat. She then mocks Mika, boasting that she personally wiped out what remained of Asano's loyal warriors. During this exchange, the witch casually drops a small dagger near Mika's feet. Mika quietly notices. Back at the Ronin camp, survivors slowly gather. The witch was wrong. They are wounded. They are shaken. But most of them are still alive. Oishi accepts responsibility. I waited too long, he admits. We cannot hesitate again. Whether we succeed or fall, we fight now. If we die with purpose. Kai steps forward. They still have a chance. Kira believes the Ronin are dead. That illusion gives them an advantage. Even better, another opportunity will present itself in the morning. While scouting, Kai recognizes a traveling troupe of performers. He remembers seeing their act in this region before. When questioned, the performers explain they have been hired to entertain guests at Lord Kira's wedding. A new plan forms. The Ronin gather and acknowledge the truth. Many of them will not survive what comes next. Before departing, they record their story, why they chose this path and what they intend to accomplish, so future generations will understand. Every man signs the document. Kai signs as well. He is no longer an outsider. Asano then steps forward and confesses publicly that Kai, not he, killed the six-eyed beast. He bows in shame and offers his apology. He also presents Kai with a second blade. A samurai carries two swords, he says. Night returns. Kira's fortress fills with guards and guests. The performers are allowed inside. Hidden among them are Kai and Oishi. As Mika is brought in wearing ceremonial robes and seated beside Kira, the performance begins. Fire dances across the stage, music fills the hall, and death moves silently through the shadows. Ronin scale the outer walls and slip into guarded corridors. One by one, they eliminate sentries. Each fallen guard is quietly replaced by a disguised Ronin. The illusion holds. For a moment, the witch senses something wrong. Oishi, masked as part of the performance, begins maneuvering toward Kira. While eliminating 3 guards, a struggle breaks out. An arrow grazes Oishi's arm, spoiling his immediate strike. Chaos erupts. Fighting spreads throughout the castle. Kai cuts through enemies with terrifying efficiency. Kira unleashes his most feared warrior against the attackers, a giant of a man known for slaughtering dozens alone. Fear ripples through the Ronin. Then one of them hurls burning powder into the armory. A massive explosion tears through the structure. Kira's champion is killed instantly. The witch transforms into a black-winged creature and escapes into the sky. Seeing an opening, Mika draws the hidden dagger and stabs Kira. The wound isn't fatal. She flees. The castle becomes a war zone. Blades clash. Fires spread. Kai and Mika find each other amid the chaos. No one will ever separate us again, Kai says. The witch returns. She morphs into a towering dragon, wreathed in flame. Kai stands his ground. I am not afraid of you. The dragon unleashes torrents of fire. Kai blocks the inferno with the spirit blade, pushing forward despite the heat. Nearby, only a thin wall separates Oishi and Kira. They smash through it and engage in brutal combat, 2 seasoned warriors locked in a final reckoning. During Kai's battle, his sword is knocked from his grasp. The dragon turns toward Mika. Desperate, Kai draws upon the hidden power he swore never to use. The sword flies back into his hand. With a single devastating strike, Kai slashes through the dragon. The monstrous form collapses, shrinking back into the witch's human body. She dies. Inside the castle, Oishi overpowers Kira. With one decisive swing, he severs Kira's head. He raises it before the surviving fighters. The war is over. Kira's soldiers drop their weapons. Later, the 47 Ronin return to Akko with Mika. They visit Lord Asano's grave. Oishi places Kira's head and Asano's sword before the tomb. Your honor has been restored, he says. At last, Mika confesses her love to Kai, and their long-denied bond finally begins. Analysis: what if I told you that one of the greatest revenge stories ever told isn't about rage, it isn't about bloodlust, and it definitely isn't about winning. It's about loyalty. A loyalty so absolute that 47 warriors willingly walked toward death, not because they were forced, but because honor demanded it. This is the legend behind 47 Ronin. A story that has echoed through Japanese history for centuries, and in 2013, it was reborn not as a grounded historical drama, but as a dark, mythic fantasy filled with monsters, magic, cursed blades, and doomed heroes. But here's where things get interesting. This film didn't just retell a famous legend, it reinvented it. By blending samurai tradition with supernatural mythology, 47 Ronin became something rare, a bridge between ancient folklore and modern fantasy cinema. Some viewers saw it as bold, others saw it as a betrayal of history, yet years later, people are still talking about it. So today, we're diving deep into 47 Ronin, exploring what makes it unique, why its story still resonates, and whether this misunderstood epic deserves a second look. Because beneath the visual spectacle, beneath the monsters and magic, lies a tragic tale about identity, sacrifice, and what it truly means to live and die with honor. Let's begin. Before we dive into the tragedy, before the betrayals, the monsters, and the blood-soaked vows, let's set the stage. 47 Ronin was released in 2013, directed by Carl Rinch, and led by Keanu Reeves alongside a predominantly Japanese cast, a deliberate attempt to merge Hollywood spectacle with Eastern mythology. At its core, this film exists at the crossroads of genres. It is part action epic, part dark fantasy, part historical legend, and part tragic romance. The story unfolds in feudal Japan, an era where a person's worth is measured by their honor, where loyalty is law, and where disobedience is often punished with death. But this is not a strict historical recreation. This version of Japan is stylized, heightened, and infused with supernatural elements. Witches walk among men, monsters lurk beyond village walls, curses shape destiny. At the center of it all is a disgraced group of samurai warriors who have lost their master, and with him their place in society. They are Ronin, masterless, dishonored, invisible. The film follows their journey as they face an impossible choice: accept a life of shame, or defy the entire system to restore their master's honor, no matter the cost. And woven into their story is Kai, a mysterious outsider. A man who belongs nowhere, rejected by society, yet carrying abilities that may be the key to everything. Without revealing spoilers, 47 Ronin is a tale of fallen warriors, forbidden love, ancient magic, and a revenge mission that is never truly about revenge. It's about proving that honor can survive even after everything else is stripped away. Brief pause. Now that we understand the world, let's talk about the deeper ideas driving this story, the themes, the symbolism, and the soul beneath the swords. At first glance, 47 Ronin looks like a revenge movie. Swords, battles, warriors seeking blood for blood, but that surface-level reading misses the real heart of the story. Because this film isn't truly about revenge. It's about duty, it's about identity, and it's about the unbearable weight of honor. The world of 47 Ronin operates under a brutal moral code. Your worth is not defined by happiness, not by freedom, not even by survival. It's defined by loyalty. The Ronin are not chasing personal vengeance. They are fulfilling an obligation that exists beyond themselves, an oath. A promise that cannot be broken, even if it leads to death. Running parallel to this is the theme of belonging. Kai is neither fully human nor fully accepted. He grows up surrounded by warriors, yet he is never allowed to become one. He is always close to the circle, but never inside it. And this creates the film's emotional spine. What happens to a person who has no place in the world, yet still chooses to fight for it? 47 Ronin also leans heavily into sacrifice. Every major decision carries a cost. Victory is never free, love is never safe, and survival is often portrayed as the lesser option compared to dying with honor. Tonally, the film blends somber tragedy with mythic fantasy. It wants to feel like a legend being whispered by firelight, not realistic, not grounded, but symbolic. This is why monsters exist in the story. They are not just creatures, they are manifestations of greed, corruption, power without conscience. Meanwhile, the Ronin represent the opposite: discipline, restraint, self-denial. The film is designed for viewers who enjoy epic storytelling stories where heroes are not rewarded with happiness, but with meaning. Because in 47 Ronin, the ultimate victory isn't survival. The ultimate victory is remaining honorable when everything else is lost. Pause. Now that we understand the soul of this story, let's walk through the journey itself, from betrayal to exile to legend. Our story begins not with a hero, but with an outcast. Kai is found as a child inside a forest rumored to be cursed. He is different, feared, whispered about. Taken in by Lord Asano's household, Kai grows up among samurai, yet he is never allowed to become one. He trains in secret, watches from the shadows, endures insults in silence. The only kindness he receives comes from Mika, Lord Asano's daughter, who sees Kai not as a monster, but as a human being. Years later, political tension grips the land. Lord Kira, a ruthless ruler, desires control over Asano's territory and Mika herself. When diplomacy fails, Kira turns to darker methods. Through forbidden sorcery, deception, and manipulation, Kira frames Lord Asano for attempting murder inside the shogun's palace. Honor demands punishment. Lord Asano is ordered to commit seppuku, a forced ritual suicide. In one stroke, a noble house is destroyed, Mika is taken hostage, and Asano's warriors are stripped of their status. They become Ronin, masterless, disgraced, broken in the eyes of society. Their leader, Oishi, appears to surrender to despair. He drinks, he fights in the streets. He allows the world to believe that the Ronin have given up, but this is a lie, a performance. Behind closed doors, the Ronin remain loyal, waiting, planning, because their oath did not die with their master. Kai, meanwhile, is sold into slavery, chained, beaten, forgotten, until Oishi secretly finds him. Kai reveals that Kira is protected by supernatural forces, creatures and magic beyond ordinary steel. If they are to succeed, they will need Kai. Reluctantly, the Ronin accept him, not as a samurai, but as a necessary weapon. The group begins a perilous journey. They seek mystical weapons. They confront illusions designed to break their minds. They face monsters that embody nightmare and legend. Along the way, trust is tested. Some Ronin doubt Kai, some fear him, others slowly recognize his courage. Each step forward brings them closer to Kira and closer to their own deaths. Eventually, the Ronin return in secret to Kira's fortress. They strike with precision, not as berserk warriors but as disciplined ghosts. Their objective is simple: kill Kira, expose his corruption, restore Lord Asano's honor. No one expects to survive, and none of them are pretending otherwise, because for the Ronin, this mission is not about coming home. It is about keeping a promise, and that promise leads us to an ending that is as tragic as it is inevitable. The final battle is not framed as a moment of triumph, it is framed as destiny. The Ronin storm Lord Kira's stronghold knowing something very important. They are not fighting for their lives, they are fighting for their deaths to mean something. Steel clashes, arrows fall, bodies drop. But through discipline and coordination, the Ronin cut their way forward like a single, unstoppable force. Kai confronts the supernatural guardian protecting Kira. Using the very darkness he once feared within himself, Kai embraces who he truly is. Not a monster, not a curse, but a warrior. Kira is finally reached, and he is executed, not in rage, not with cruelty, but with ritual precision. Justice is delivered. Lord Asano's name is cleared. Mika is freed. The Ronin have succeeded, but the story does not end with celebration, because in this world, honor is inseparable from consequence. The Ronin voluntarily surrender themselves to the shogun. They confess to killing Kira. They do not beg, they do not justify, they kneel. The shogun recognizes that their actions restored moral balance, yet law still demands punishment. The Ronin are sentenced to commit seppuku, ritual suicide, not as criminals but as honorable warriors. One by one they kneel, they draw their blades, they end their own lives with calm resolve. No screams, no resistance. Only acceptance. This is not presented as tragedy alone, it is presented as fulfillment. They have completed their purpose, they kept their oath, their story is finished. Kai, however, is granted mercy. As an outsider, as someone who does not fully belong to the samurai code, he is spared. But this mercy is bittersweet, because Kai must live with the memory of everyone who chose death. Symbolically, the ending reinforces the film's central message. True victory is not survival. True victory is staying loyal to your values even when it destroys you. The Ronin do not become heroes because they win. They become legends because they never betrayed who they were, and even in death, their loyalty echoes through history. Beneath the sword fights, beneath the monsters, beneath the spectacle, 47 Ronin is quietly speaking in symbols. Visual whispers, hidden meanings, details meant to be felt more than noticed. One of the most consistent visual patterns in the film is color contrast. The Ronin are often dressed in dark, muted tones, blacks, grays, deep blues. Colors of humility, colors of mourning. Meanwhile, Lord Kira's world is drenched in golds, crimson reds, and sharp blacks. Luxury, power, corruption. This contrast isn't accidental. It visually separates those who serve honor from those who exploit power. Another recurring symbol is mirrors and reflections. Kai is frequently shown near reflective surfaces: water, polished metal, glass. These moments reinforce his internal struggle. He is constantly confronting who he is and who he is afraid to become. The monsters themselves are symbolic. They are not random fantasy creatures. They represent human sin given physical form. The dragon embodies greed. The witch embodies manipulation. The demon warriors embody blind obedience. In other words, the greatest evil in this world isn't magic. It's corrupted desire. There is also subtle foreshadowing in how the Ronin move as a group. Early in the film, they are often framed separated, scattered, broken compositions. As the story progresses, they are increasingly shown standing shoulder to shoulder, moving as one, visually showing their return to unity. Another easily missed detail lies in the weapons. Kai's sword is visually distinct, darker, rougher. Less ornate, it mirrors his identity, unpolished, feared, yet incredibly powerful. Traditional samurai blades are beautiful. Kai's blade is functional, brutal, honest. Even Mika's clothing carries meaning. Early on, her outfits are light-colored, soft, hopeful. As tragedy unfolds, her wardrobe shifts toward darker tones, grief silently replacing innocence. The film also borrows visual language from Japanese ink paintings. Wide frames, negative space, minimalist backgrounds. This creates a mythic storybook quality, as if we are watching a moving legend, not a documentary. Every one of these choices reinforces the same idea. 47 Ronin is not trying to be realistic history. It is trying to feel like a fable, a tragic poem, a cinematic folk tale about honor, loss, and devotion. Soft pause, and behind this mythic world, there's an equally fascinating real-world production story. Let's step behind the camera, bringing a legendary Japanese story, blending it with Hollywood fantasy, and delivering it on a blockbuster scale was never going to be simple. In fact, the making of 47 Ronin was almost as turbulent as the story it tells. One of the most surprising facts is the sheer scale of the production. The film was shot across massive studio sets and soundstages, with entire villages constructed from scratch. Rather than relying purely on green screens, many environments were physically built first, then enhanced digitally. This hybrid approach helped give the world a grounded texture beneath the fantasy. Keanu Reeves committed heavily to physical preparation. He trained extensively in swordsmanship, horseback riding, and martial movement. The goal wasn't flashy choreography, but controlled, disciplined motion. Reeves studied how samurai hold themselves, how they stand, how they breathe, because in samurai culture, posture itself communicates honor. Another fascinating detail is that many creature designs were pulled directly from Japanese folklore. Not Western fantasy, not dragons inspired by medieval Europe, but spirits and demons rooted in ancient myth. This decision gave the monsters a distinctly Eastern personality, even when heavily stylized. Behind the scenes, the film faced multiple delays. Extensive reshoots were ordered after early test screenings. Entire sequences were reworked, new visual effects added, new story beats inserted. This is one reason the film's tone sometimes feels like two movies stitched together, a grounded samurai tragedy and a high fantasy epic. The budget quietly grew massive, making 47 Ronin one of the most expensive samurai-themed films ever produced. Another little-known fact, most of the Ronin actors underwent group training. They practiced formations together, not just individual fighting. This was done so that, on screen, they would move like a single unit, like a real brotherhood, because the Ronin are never meant to feel like separate heroes. They are meant to feel like one shared soul. Even Keanu Reeves' character was deliberately designed to stand apart visually. Different armor, different fighting style, different camera framing, everything reinforces his outsider status. Despite the film's troubled production, many cast and crew later stated they believed deeply in the story's emotional core. They weren't trying to make a historically perfect film. They were trying to make a myth, a legend, a cinematic folktale. Brief pause, now that we've explored how this world was built. Let's see how 47 Ronin stacks up against other films, and where it truly stands among its genre peers. To truly understand 47 Ronin, you have to understand what kind of movie it is not. It is not a traditional samurai film. It is not a historical reenactment. And it is not trying to compete with grounded classics. Films like Seven Samurai, Harakiri, or 13 Assassins focus on realism, mud, sweat, political tension, human cruelty. They present samurai as men trapped inside broken systems. 47 Ronin takes a different path. It treats samurai as mythic figures, almost legendary beings, closer to folklore heroes than historical soldiers. In this sense, the film has more in common with fantasy epics like 300 or Clash of the Titans than with classic Japanese cinema. Stylized violence, larger-than-life villains, heightened visual language. Another strong comparison is with The Last Samurai. Both films feature an outsider entering Japanese culture. Both explore respect for tradition. But where The Last Samurai strives for emotional realism, 47 Ronin embraces fantasy abstraction. One seeks authenticity, the other seeks mythology. Compared to modern fantasy franchises like Lord of the Rings, 47 Ronin is smaller in scope but similar in spirit. A fellowship bound by oath, a doomed mission. Victory that comes at enormous cost. Where the film struggles is balance. Some viewers expect a serious samurai epic and receive fantasy spectacle. Others expect a pure fantasy adventure and encounter long, quiet stretches of tragedy. This identity conflict sits at the center of its divisive reputation. What 47 Ronin arguably does better than many genre films is sincerity. It never mocks its own story. It never winks at the audience. It commits fully to its tragic tone. Where it falls short is character depth. Most of the Ronin are defined by loyalty rather than personality. Classic samurai films often give individual warriors more distinct identities. But as a mythic ensemble, this approach makes thematic sense, because the Ronin are meant to be remembered not as individuals, but as one legend, one sacrifice, one oath. So how did audiences and critics respond to this strange hybrid? Let's talk about its reception. When 47 Ronin was released, the reaction was immediate and deeply divided. Many critics were harsh. They criticized the film's pacing, its heavy reliance on visual effects, and what they perceived as a confused identity, not quite historical drama, not quite full fantasy. To some reviewers, the movie felt too stylized to be serious, and too serious to be fun, but audiences told a more complicated story. A large portion of viewers connected with the film's emotional core. They didn't fall in love with the plot mechanics, they fell in love with the feeling, the melancholy, the sense of doomed honor, the tragic beauty of warriors choosing death over disgrace. For fantasy fans, the creatures, magic, and dark atmosphere were appealing. For Keanu Reeves fans, his quiet, restrained performance resonated. Over time, something interesting happened. 47 Ronin quietly developed a cult following, not massive, not mainstream, but loyal. Viewers began revisiting it years later with different expectations, not as a failed samurai epic, but as a mythic fantasy tragedy. And through that lens, the film aged better than its initial reputation suggested. Today, 47 Ronin is often described as misunderstood, flawed, but strangely sincere. It's a movie many people admit isn't great, yet still find themselves strangely drawn to, and that's often the mark of cult cinema, not perfection, but personality. Soft pause, which brings us to the final question. After all this, is 47 Ronin actually worth your time? Let's close with the verdict. So, after the legends, after the bloodshed, after the sacrifice, where does 47 Ronin truly stand? This is not a perfect film. It has pacing issues, some uneven visual effects, and characters who sometimes feel more symbolic than fully realized, but perfection was never its goal. 47 Ronin aims for something rarer, sincerity. Its greatest strength is its atmosphere. The film commits completely to its tragic tone. It never turns its heroes into jokes. It never undercuts emotion with cheap humor. It treats loyalty as sacred, honor as absolute, and sacrifice as meaningful. Visually, the world is striking. Dark castles, snow-covered forests, glowing monster lairs. Every frame feels like a painted legend. Emotionally, the story works best when it leans into quiet moments. The looks between warriors, the unspoken understanding, the calm acceptance of death. Where it struggles is accessibility. If you expect a fast-paced action blockbuster, you may feel disappointed. If you expect a grounded historical drama, you may feel misled. But if you approach 47 Ronin as a mythic fantasy tragedy, a cinematic folktale, its strengths become much clearer. So who should watch this movie? Fans of dark fantasy, viewers who enjoy slow-burn epics, people drawn to stories about honor, loyalty, and doomed heroism, those willing to embrace style and symbolism over realism. Final verdict: 47 Ronin is flawed, but it is honest, it is ambitious, and it is emotionally sincere. Not a forgotten failure, not a hidden masterpiece, but a misunderstood legend that deserves to be judged for what it is, not for what it never tried to be. Reviews: why take a legendary Japanese tale that holds deep cultural and historical meaning, then reshape it in a way that shows so little reverence for what made it important in the first place? If this film had been released under a completely different title, with no connection to the 47 Ronin, I might have found it moderately enjoyable as a piece of fantasy entertainment. But attaching it to one of Japan's most treasured stories sets expectations the movie simply does not attempt to honor. The real-life account of the 47 loyal samurai has inspired centuries of theater, literature, and cinema because it represents devotion, sacrifice, and the code of honor. The 2013 adaptation transforms that grounded legend into something closer to a surreal fairy tale. It feels less like a historical retelling and more like a mashup of medieval Japan and high fantasy spectacle. Imagine watching a movie about the American Revolution where alien creatures suddenly start appearing. It creates the same kind of tonal whiplash. This story is deeply ingrained in Japanese cultural identity, and turning it into a creature-filled fantasy risks alienating audiences who expected a respectful adaptation. While most of the cast is Japanese, the film gives the impression that the creative team had only a surface-level understanding of the culture they were drawing from. One of the biggest sticking points is the inclusion of a non-Japanese warrior at the center of the narrative. Historically, Japan enforced strict isolation policies for centuries, and foreign presence was extremely limited. The concept of an outsider becoming a samurai in that era is simply implausible. On top of that, the film introduces shape-shifting witches, towering monster-like warriors, massive beasts, and other supernatural elements that feel completely disconnected from the original legend. If the filmmakers had openly presented this as a fantasy inspired by Japanese folklore, perhaps leaning into mythological traditions like kitsune or yokai, it could have worked as escapist entertainment. But positioning it as the 47 Ronin while discarding the heart of that story makes the entire endeavor feel misguided. From a technical standpoint, the movie is not without merit. Visually, it is often striking. The cinematography is lush, the sets are elaborate, and the costumes are richly detailed. The musical score adds an atmospheric quality that sometimes elevates the experience. Among the cast, Hiroyuki Sanada stands out with a performance that carries dignity and restraint, offering a glimpse of what the film might have been with stronger creative choices. Unfortunately, these positives are undermined by significant problems. The editing feels uneven and frequently chaotic, disrupting the flow of the story. Visual effects are inconsistent, with some sequences looking polished while others appear unfinished. Director Carl Rinch's inexperience shows in the film's lack of cohesion and inability to build emotional momentum. Performance-wise, most of the cast struggles. Keanu Reeves appears stiff and miscast, portraying a character whose backstory feels hastily inserted rather than organically developed. Ko Shibasaki seems uncomfortable, and Rinko Kikuchi's performance leans into exaggerated theatrics that clash with the tone. Even talented actors are hampered by awkward dialogue and clumsy writing that make sincere delivery nearly impossible. The characters themselves are thinly sketched archetypes, familiar tropes with little depth. This might have been forgivable if they were engaging, but they rarely rise above being functional placeholders. Narratively, the film begins in a sluggish manner and never truly finds its rhythm. It fails to generate tension, emotional investment, or excitement. Action sequences are sparse, and when they do occur, they lean toward excessive spectacle rather than impactful choreography, often resembling animated sequences more than grounded combat. At its core, the story follows fallen samurai living in disgrace, alongside Kai, a mysterious outsider saved years earlier by Lord Asano. Kai harbors feelings for Asano's daughter Mika. When rival Lord Kira schemes to seize control, employing dark magic and monstrous forces, tragedy unfolds, setting the stage for revenge. While this framework loosely echoes the original legend, the execution strips it of its emotional power. In the end, the film looks impressive on the surface, but lacks respect for the legacy it borrows from. As someone who appreciates both fantasy cinema and Japanese history, I found the result deeply disappointing. It's a visually polished fantasy that might have fared better as an original concept, but as an adaptation of the 47 Ronin, it feels hollow and misguided. Kai is dragged into a brutal tournament through dark sorcery, only to be humiliated for not being a true samurai. Soon after, the same supernatural manipulation clouds Lord Asano's mind, driving him to strike Lord Kira and seal his own fate through seppuku. Oishi eventually pieces together the truth behind Kira's witchcraft, but it is too late. The shogun hands over Akko and Mika to Kira, brands Oishi and his loyal men as Ronin, and decrees a wedding to take place 1 year later. Oishi is thrown into prison, while Kai is sold into bondage. From there, the narrative stretches on in a long and meandering fashion, and not in a satisfying way. The pacing is sluggish, the storytelling rigid, and the dialogue painfully wooden. Much of the cast delivers their English lines in a stiff, unnatural manner, which only heightens the sense of emotional distance. Even with Keanu Reeves added as a central figure, the film never truly finds a pulse. There are glimpses of visual ambition, but director Carl Rinch, relatively unknown at the time, struggles to breathe life into the material. Oddly enough, the most engaging presence ends up being a secondary, heavier-set samurai, while most others speak in flat, monotone voices that drain scenes of energy. At its core, 47 Ronin adapts one of Japan's most famous historical legends, a band of masterless samurai seeking vengeance for their fallen lord. Hollywood takes this revered tale and reshapes it into a large-scale fantasy spectacle, layering magic, monsters, and heavy visual effects onto what was originally a grounded story of loyalty and honor. Reportedly, studio interference pushed the filmmakers toward adding more wizardry-style fantasy elements, a decision that ultimately works against the film. Strip away the supernatural excess, and there's a reasonably compelling revenge narrative underneath. Leave it in, and the result is an overstuffed production dominated by dated-looking CGI and chaotic spectacle. One of the film's strongest aspects is its cast. Reeves serves as the audience's entry point into this unfamiliar world, similar to the outsider role Tom Cruise played in The Last Samurai. Unfortunately, this is far from Reeves' best performance, as his subdued approach often feels emotionally distant. On the positive side, the supporting cast features respected Japanese actors who bring credibility and sincerity to their roles, including Hiroyuki Sanada, Tadanobu Asano, Ko Shibasaki, and others. Most deliver solid work, though Rinko Kikuchi's portrayal of the villainous witch leans heavily into exaggerated theatrical territory, which clashes with the film's supposed gravitas. Visually, 47 Ronin offers plenty of action and lavish set pieces. Sweeping landscapes, creature designs inspired by Japanese folklore, and large-scale battles provide occasional spectacle. Some of these moments work better than others, and a few creature concepts are genuinely interesting. Still, many sequences feel oddly familiar, evoking comparisons to The Lord of the Rings more than traditional samurai cinema. It is also refreshing to see Hiroyuki Tagawa cast in a role that doesn't default to villainy. The story blends supernatural fantasy with a tragic romance. Kai, a half-Japanese outcast taken in by a compassionate lord, falls in love with his benefactor's daughter while remaining loyal to a household that largely rejects him. When witchcraft destroys that family from within, Kai and the newly disgraced Ronin unite to rescue the woman and avenge their master. Themes of honor, sacrifice, love, and redemption run throughout, but they rarely achieve the emotional weight they aim for. Despite decent locations, impressive production design, and occasional flashes of inspiration, the film never fully ignites. It plods along rather than surging forward, and other Japan-set action films released around the same time ended up overshadowing it. The conclusion, rooted in real historical tradition, may also feel culturally distant or uncomfortable for viewers unfamiliar with Japanese customs. Whatever one thinks of Keanu Reeves, he is not the primary reason the film falters. The larger issue lies in the uneasy attempt to balance authenticity with Western accessibility. The movie wants to honor a deeply Japanese legend while reshaping it into a Hollywood fantasy blockbuster, and it ultimately satisfies neither goal. The result is a film caught between cultures and tones, ambitious, visually busy, occasionally interesting, but fundamentally misguided. At its core, this film aims for epic fantasy spectacle, but it never quite becomes the powerful legend it wants to be. Some viewers may enjoy the explosive visual overload during the final act, while others will find it completely over the top. Either way, the narrative relies heavily on familiar, good versus evil territory, and genuine emotional depth is in short supply. If you're willing to ignore those weaknesses, there is a small amount of entertainment to be found, just not enough to make it truly memorable. The story begins in Akko, where Lord Asano and his loyal samurai leader, Oishi, discover a mysterious mixed-blood child in the forest. The boy, later named Kai, is brought into Asano's household and grows up alongside Asano's daughter, Mika. As adults, Kai and Mika secretly fall in love, even though their bond is forbidden. Trouble arrives when Lord Kira visits with a sinister sorceress at his side. Through dark magic, Asano is manipulated into attacking Kira, an act that seals his fate. The shogun orders Asano to end his life through ritual suicide, allowing him an honorable death. With their master gone, Oishi and his warriors are stripped of their status and scattered. Oishi is imprisoned and publicly humiliated, while Kai is sold into slavery far from home. After a year of suffering and waiting, Oishi is released and begins quietly gathering the former samurai. Together with Kai, they plan a dangerous revenge mission to restore honor and bring justice to Kira. Loosely inspired by the famous Japanese legend, the film transforms the tale into a fantasy-heavy adventure filled with monsters, witches, and mystical battles. Many critics dismissed the movie upon release, citing its westernized approach, supernatural additions, and the casting of a Hollywood star in a traditionally Japanese story. Those complaints are understandable, but the sheer hostility surrounding the film always felt excessive. Watching it now, it becomes clear that the movie isn't the disaster it was made out to be, though it's certainly far from great. The biggest problem is not the premise but the execution. This should be a story about wounded pride, quiet suffering, impossible love, and ultimate sacrifice. Instead, much of that emotion is simply explained through dialogue rather than shown through meaningful character moments. Scenes often feel flat, and conversations rarely deepen our understanding of the characters or their motivations. Visually, the movie is polished. The special effects are impressive from a technical standpoint, yet they feel empty because there is little emotional weight behind them. The spectacle overwhelms rather than enhances the storytelling. It often seems as if the filmmakers believed bigger visuals alone would compensate for thin character development. On a more positive note, the production design deserves praise. The costumes, locations, and overall atmosphere create a convincing and visually rich world. Unfortunately, this craftsmanship highlights how much potential is being wasted. The cast delivers mixed results. Hiroyuki Sanada brings quiet strength and dignity to Oishi, making him the emotional anchor of the story. Several supporting actors do what they can with limited material. Keanu Reeves, however, gives a largely subdued performance. His restrained delivery might be intended as stoic, but it frequently comes across as disengaged. As a result, the central romance never fully convinces. As the plot moves toward its conclusion, there is surprisingly little tension. The dangers never feel truly overwhelming, and the stakes fail to register emotionally. The film drifts from one event to the next, throws in a large creature or magical sequence, and ultimately ends without leaving much impact. There may be a powerful film hidden somewhere inside this concept, but it never fully emerges. Weak storytelling choices, underdeveloped characters, and hollow spectacle prevent the movie from reaching its potential. What remains is a visually ambitious fantasy that looks impressive on the surface, yet struggles to give viewers a reason to truly care. This fantasy-infused samurai epic delivers a mix of fierce rivalries, emotional weight, sweeping battles, and relentless swordplay. At its core, the film champions timeless virtues: courage, loyalty, honor, brotherhood, redemption, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for a greater cause. Visually, it embraces a grand, theatrical style, bursting with rich colors and striking production design, shifting effortlessly between lavish interiors and expansive outdoor landscapes. Keanu Reeves stars as Kai, a mysterious outcast discovered as a child and taken in by a noble samurai clan. His character appears inspired by several historical and cinematic archetypes, including the real-life Western samurai William Adams, the disillusioned warrior portrayed by Tom Cruise in The Last Samurai, and the legendary Japanese hero Minamoto Yoshitsune. Reeves gives a restrained yet earnest performance, portraying Kai as a quiet figure defined more by inner conflict than outward bravado. The supporting cast is packed with notable Japanese performers who add credibility and cultural texture to the story. Hiroyuki Sanada brings gravitas to Oishi, the steadfast leader of the Ronin, while Hiroyuki Tagawa commands the screen as the rigid shogun. Tadanobu Asano plays the cruel Lord Kira, and Rinko Kikuchi embraces a deliciously sinister turn as a shape-shifting witch. Ko Shibasaki provides a gentle presence as Mika, Kai's forbidden love interest. Together, they help ground the film's fantasy elements in emotional reality. Cinematographer John Matheson paints the world with sweeping shots of castles, mountain ranges, forests, and fortified cities, giving the film a storybook quality. The score by Ilan Eshkeri leans heavily into Eastern musical influences, offering thunderous battle cues and haunting melodies that heighten the drama. Interestingly, an alternate score composed by Javier Navarrete was reportedly prepared, but ultimately left unused. Directed by Carl Rinch in his feature debut, the film displays clear visual ambition, even if the storytelling occasionally struggles under the weight of its own mythology. Reports of creative disagreements with the studio seem evident in certain tonal inconsistencies. While the movie failed to become a major theatrical hit, it found a stronger audience through home media and streaming platforms. This adaptation represents yet another cinematic interpretation of the famous 47 Ronin legend, a tale that has been retold many times across Japanese and international cinema. Compared to earlier versions, this one leans far more into fantasy than historical realism, trading grounded martial arts choreography for supernatural creatures and magical confrontations. That creative choice may disappoint viewers expecting wall-to-wall sword combat, especially given the legendary reputation of the Ronin story. Another sticking point is the unquestioned authority of the shogun, whose commands are treated as absolute truth. The film never seriously entertains the idea that his judgment might be flawed, even when the audience sympathizes with the Ronin's desire for vengeance. Similarly, the witch's decision to operate in service of Lord Kira feels odd. Considering her immense power, she seems more than capable of pursuing her own goals independently. Although Kai is positioned as the protagonist, the emotional backbone of the story arguably belongs to Oishi. It is his journey, from disgraced leader to avenger, that carries the most dramatic weight. Kai, meanwhile, is tasked with confronting the supernatural threat in the climax, creating a split focus that sometimes blurs who the true hero is meant to be. The narrative begins in feudal Japan, where the young Kai is discovered in the wilderness by Lord Asano and his warriors. Raised within the clan yet never fully accepted, Kai grows up alongside Mika, and their bond slowly blossoms into forbidden love. Political tensions escalate when Lord Kira arrives at the domain, and dark magic manipulates events, leading to Lord Asano's disgrace and forced suicide. Oishi and his men are stripped of their status, while Kai is sold into slavery. After a year of humiliation and suffering, Oishi regroups the scattered Ronin and rescues Kai, setting in motion a carefully planned quest for revenge. Their path is filled with deadly enemies, illusions, and monstrous obstacles as they attempt to restore their honor and punish those responsible for their lord's death. In the end, the film stands as an ambitious blend of legend, fantasy, and action. It may not satisfy purists of the traditional tale, nor action fans hoping for constant martial arts spectacle, but it offers a visually rich and emotionally earnest reimagining of a classic story. Imperfect yet earnest, it is a bold experiment that will resonate more with viewers open to mythic fantasy than strict historical drama. Keanu Reeves gives a serviceable performance as Kai, the outcast warrior who eventually stands beside a disgraced clan in their struggle against a powerful enemy. One noticeable choice is that every character speaks English, even though the cast is predominantly Asian. The film might have felt more immersive had it embraced native languages with subtitles. While the basic premise of 47 warriors being dishonored and seeking vengeance is easy to follow, much of the surrounding narrative feels muddled. Strange creatures appear with little explanation, and several story beats simply glide by without much clarity. Ultimately, it's the action sequences and visual spectacle that keep things moving, rather than the storytelling. The result is a period fantasy adventure that feels split between historical drama and supernatural spectacle, without fully excelling at either. At its core, the story follows a band of Ronin who join forces with Kai, a half-blood warrior, to avenge their fallen master, killed through the treachery of the ruthless Lord Kira. Despite its roots in a famous Japanese legend, the film leans heavily into fantasy, adding monsters, sorcery, and mythical creatures to the mix. On paper, this samurai meets magic concept has enormous potential, but execution proves to be the film's biggest weakness. The production itself is undeniably lavish. The sets are grand, the costumes are ornate, and the landscapes are lush and beautifully photographed. It's obvious that an enormous budget went into bringing this world to life. Unfortunately, impressive visuals alone cannot compensate for a lifeless script, stiff dialogue, and direction that often feels overly self-important. Reeves, while dependable, delivers a rather restrained and emotionally distant performance that fails to anchor the film in a meaningful way. The opening introduces Kai as a mixed-heritage child abandoned in the wilderness, later discovered by Lord Asano and taken into his household. Though raised among samurai, Kai is never fully accepted. Years later, political deception leads to Lord Asano being forced into ritual suicide, his land seized, and his warriors cast out. Their leader, Oishi, endures imprisonment before eventually gathering the scattered Ronin and seeking Kai's help. Together, they plan their revenge before Lord Kira can claim Asano's daughter as his bride. Where the film finds some success is in blending folklore with action. Elements such as a shape-shifting fox spirit, Tengu warriors, and a mystical Kirin add flavor to the world. The pacing is fairly steady, and the final battle delivers an entertaining climax. Heavy reliance on CGI is noticeable, but the effects are generally convincing and help sell the supernatural elements. The cast does respectable work overall, particularly the Japanese actors, who perform admirably despite delivering their lines in a non-native language. Still, this linguistic choice occasionally feels awkward and distances the viewer from the culture the film is attempting to portray. However, the movie struggles tonally. It presents itself as a grim tale of bloody revenge, yet opts for a PG-13 approach that avoids truly visceral combat. This contradiction robs the battles of impact. The romance subplot is underdeveloped, the atmosphere often too somber, and the narrative meanders as if unsure of what kind of film it wants to be. In the end, 47 Ronin is a visually striking but dramatically hollow experience. It offers pretty imagery, mythical creatures, and stylized swordplay, but little emotional weight or originality. While fans of fantasy action may find it mildly enjoyable with tempered expectations, the film ultimately feels like a missed opportunity, an ambitious concept that never quite transforms into the epic it clearly wants to be. The story centers on an outsider living among samurai who is never fully accepted due to his mixed heritage. Most of the warriors in the province treat him with open contempt, seeing him as lesser, with one notable exception. Mika, the gentle and compassionate daughter of Lord Asano. Despite knowing their feelings can never be acknowledged publicly, the two quietly fall for one another, creating a forbidden romance that hangs over much of the film. Trouble arrives when Shogun Tsuneyoshi pays a visit, accompanied by Lord Kira from a rival region. Kira is not alone. By his side is a mysterious sorceress who specializes in dark magic and deception. Together, they hatch a plan to seize control of Asano's lands through manipulation, curses, and political sabotage. Without diving into spoiler territory, these events eventually ignite a chain reaction that leads to betrayal, tragedy, and a quest for vengeance. As a piece of entertainment, the film is moderately engaging. The landscapes are often beautiful, and several performances are solid enough to hold interest. The two main female characters are particularly appealing, both in presence and screen charisma. That said, some of the digital effects look cheap, and many action sequences feel oddly weightless, sometimes pulling attention away from the drama rather than enhancing it. I couldn't help thinking the movie might have benefited from a grittier, more grounded approach instead of leaning so heavily into fantasy spectacle. Still, it's watchable and lands somewhere slightly above average. Where the film struggles most is in its approach to cultural storytelling. The plot feels very much like a standard Hollywood framework draped over Japanese history, complete with a westernized protagonist inserted as the emotional center. It's easy to see why this interpretation failed to resonate strongly with Japanese audiences. The narrative introduces a half-Japanese, half-foreign hero, raised in a mystical forest by a supernatural master, gifted with extraordinary abilities, and positioned as the key figure in a legendary Japanese tale. This creative choice alone creates a sense of disconnect. Keanu Reeves receives top billing, but Hiroyuki Sanada, as the loyal and disciplined leader of the Ronin, delivers a more compelling performance. Sanada brings quiet strength, dignity, and authority, while Reeves often feels restrained, distant, and oddly disengaged. His character's backstory grants him special powers, magical weapons, and superhuman endurance, yet his emotional presence rarely matches the scale of his abilities. It often feels like the wrong actor was positioned as the central focus. Tadanobu Asano plays Lord Kira as a fairly standard villain, but Rinko Kikuchi's witch is far more memorable. She clearly relishes the role, injecting energy and menace into every scene, and easily becomes the most entertaining antagonist in the film. Her manipulations, psychological torment of Mika, and theatrical cruelty add some much-needed personality to the otherwise familiar villainy. Visually, the production design, costumes, and shooting locations are the film's strongest assets. Temples, castles, forests, and armor all look impressive, even when the computer-generated creatures do not. The movie throws in a parade of fantasy elements: shape-shifting monsters, underground gladiator-style fights, towering beasts, and strange demon-like guardians. Unfortunately, these creatures often feel like distractions, and the supporting samurai frequently exist only to be thrown aside, killed, or replaced by stunt doubles. The film's commercial failure makes sense. Its story beats are predictable, its tone feels conflicted between epic tragedy and glossy fantasy, and its attempt to create a Western point-of-entry character weakens the cultural authenticity. The PG-13 rating also hurts the impact, resulting in surprisingly bloodless swordplay despite the heavy themes of honor, ritual suicide, and violent retribution. Even so, the movie isn't completely without merit. Kikuchi's witch is gleefully nasty, the production design is consistently strong, and a handful of moments capture the spirit of tragic loyalty the story is aiming for. Unfortunately, those bright spots aren't enough to overcome a formulaic script and uneven execution. In the end, it's a visually ambitious but emotionally muted retelling of a legendary tale, interesting in places, frustrating in others, and ultimately a missed opportunity. Cultural appropriation becomes especially noticeable when one society takes a foundational story from another culture and reshapes it according to its own commercial instincts. The latest Hollywood interpretation of the famous Genroku Ako incident, the true 18th century Japanese legend about samurai who avenged their disgraced master, reflects this tendency quite clearly. Long before Hollywood arrived, Japan had already explored this story through multiple respected film adaptations, spanning decades. Despite that extensive legacy, Universal Pictures decided the tale still needed an Americanized makeover. Rather than presenting a faithful retelling, the studio heavily remodels the legend by injecting fantasy creatures, dark magic, and a Western protagonist into what was originally a grounded historical narrative about honor and duty. The inclusion of a European outsider at the center of the story feels less like creative inspiration and more like a marketing calculation, a way to anchor a massive production to a recognizable Hollywood star. Keanu Reeves steps into the role of Kai, a mixed heritage outsider whose actions ultimately drive both the tragedy and its resolution. In effect, the film positions him as the guiding force behind how Japanese warriors confront their crisis, which may sit uncomfortably with viewers familiar with the source material. First-time director Carl Rinch, working from a script by Chris Morgan and Hassan Amini, delivers a straightforward revenge narrative that pits warrior against warrior and builds toward a somber conclusion that leaves little room for continuation. Viewers who enter the film without knowledge of the historical legend or of how dramatically it has been altered may find themselves more easily entertained by its glossy sword and sorcery spectacle. However, imagining a foreign reinterpretation of a sacred American historical event gives a reasonable sense of how this version of 47 Ronin might feel to traditionalists. Set in feudal Japan during the early 1700s, the story follows Lord Asano of the Akko province, who takes in a wandering boy named Kai, the child of a foreign sailor and a Japanese woman. Abandoned by his mother and raised among demons, Kai eventually escapes and finds refuge under Asano's protection. He grows up alongside Asano's daughter Mika, and the two quietly fall in love. Yet Kai's mixed blood prevents him from ever being accepted as a true samurai, relegating him instead to a lesser role as a scout and errand runner. Early in the film, Kai proves his worth by killing a monstrous forest creature, though another warrior falsely claims credit. Asano's loyal commander, Oishi, recognizes Kai's bravery, but social barriers remain firmly in place. Trouble escalates when the shogun visits Asano's estate accompanied by Lord Kira, a neighboring ruler harboring malicious intentions. Kira conspires with a shape-shifting witch to manipulate Asano into committing a grave offense, leading the disgraced lord to perform ritual suicide. With their master dead, Asano's warriors are stripped of their status and cast out as Ronin. Oishi is imprisoned, Mika is ordered to become Kira's bride after a year of mourning, and Kai is sold into brutal captivity as an arena fighter. Time passes, bitterness hardens, and once Oishi is freed, he secretly gathers his scattered comrades. Together, they recruit Kai and set their sights on avenging Asano and destroying Kira. As a samurai epic, 47 Ronin ultimately feels serviceable but uninspired. The action lacks scale, the sword fights rarely thrill, and the visual spectacle never quite achieves the majesty it strives for. The film's climax, rooted in mass ritual suicide, also feels emotionally distant for Western audiences. While the production boasts striking imagery and occasional moments of intrigue, it struggles to balance reverence for its source with Hollywood's impulse to embellish. In the end, this version of 47 Ronin stands as a curious hybrid, part legend, part fantasy, but never fully satisfying as either. Imagine if a space opera like Star Wars ended with nearly everyone tearing themselves apart in a grim, fatalistic finale, and you'll have a rough sense of the emotional destination this movie aims for. Unfortunately, despite its massive budget, the film often looks cheaper than it should. Many of the vast mountain landscapes appear blatantly digital, and the swirling dragon associated with the witch resembles something closer to a parade attraction than a fearsome mythic beast. It seems the filmmakers leaned heavily into magic and sorcery to compensate for narrative gaps, especially since the real historical incident behind the story doesn't offer a clear explanation for why Lord Asano attacked his guest. The poisoning sequence echoes a classic assassination moment from You Only Live Twice, where poison is secretly delivered from above using a thread. Here, the witch's methods feel more restrained than the flamboyant dark magic scene in other fantasy films, including Snow White and the Huntsman. Visually, however, the movie fares better than it does narratively. The production design, costumes, and cinematography give the world a polished, epic look that often surpasses the strength of the plot itself. That said, audiences in Japan reportedly weren't impressed, and the studio eventually labeled the project a major financial misfire. In the end, 47 Ronin lands as a watchable film with ambition, but not much passion. The story centers on a group of samurai whose lord, Asano, is manipulated into committing seppuku by the treacherous Lord Kira, aided by a supernatural witch. Declared masterless and forbidden from seeking vengeance, the samurai become Ronin. Even so, they choose to pursue revenge, believing that living with dishonor is worse than dying for defiance. The film loosely adapts a famous 18th-century Japanese legend, but layers it with heavy fantasy elements, elaborate CGI creatures, and the addition of Keanu Reeves as an outcast half-breed warrior who falls in love with Asano's daughter. This creative choice shifts the story away from grounded tragedy and into mythic spectacle, which softens the emotional weight of the original tale. Still, the result is a fairly entertaining blend of action, adventure, and fantasy, capped by an ending that feels earned, even if it's far from cheerful. Reeves delivers a serviceable performance, though many of the supporting actors leave a stronger impression. Hiroyuki Sanada, in particular, brings quiet authority and gravitas. The combat sequences are frequent and competently staged, and while the effects are hit or miss, they're generally acceptable. The post-converted 3D, however, is unimpressive, sometimes appearing non-existent, especially during forest sequences where depth should have been most noticeable. Several factors contribute to the film's disappointment. Historically, it takes enormous liberties, though that may not bother viewers unfamiliar with the real legend. More frustrating is that the trailer showcases nearly every visually striking moment, leaving little left to surprise. Some flashy characters and creatures exist purely for spectacle and add almost nothing to the narrative. Reeves' character, while likable, is written with minimal depth, essentially blending familiar traits from his past roles without offering anything new. The script leans heavily into Western-style fantasy tropes, demons, witches, mystical combat, rather than embracing authentic cultural storytelling, which makes the film feel detached from its roots. Even the climactic confrontations lack impact, feeling routine rather than thrilling. While a strictly historical retelling might have risked dryness, this fantasy-heavy approach swings too far in the opposite direction, resulting in a story that feels hollow despite its scale. Ironically, some of the very choices that likely doomed 47 Ronin at the box office are what make it mildly appealing to certain viewers. It's an odd, stylized hybrid of history and fantasy that never fully works, but occasionally intrigues. As a result, the film stands as a curious misfire, flawed, overproduced, and uneven, yet not entirely without merit. At its heart, this is a violent tale of vengeance and self-sacrifice, steeped in ideas of honor, loyalty, tradition, and obedience, values deeply intertwined with the spirit of Japanese history. The legend has lived for centuries through storytelling, written records, and multiple film adaptations, often enhanced with elements such as forbidden romance and tragic devotion. Each retelling reflects how its creators view the samurai era and the rigid moral code of the shogunate. It's easy to understand why some Japanese audiences might take issue with the Western reinterpretation of such a sacred narrative. Screenwriter Chris Morgan and director Carl Rinch clearly pushed the material into blockbuster territory, reshaping the legend as a fantasy-driven action spectacle. Their version of feudal Japan is filled with supernatural forces, forest spirits, monstrous creatures, sorcery, and dragons, creating a stylized world that prioritizes visual excitement over historical precision. Viewed strictly as entertainment, the film works rather well within its chosen genre, and I found the end result largely satisfying. The dialogue is delivered entirely in English, which was likely necessary for mainstream success in American theaters. Still, much of the cast is Japanese, and they bring authenticity and gravitas to their roles. Hiroyuki Sanada commands the screen as the honorable leader of the disgraced warriors, while Ko Shibasaki brings elegance and emotional depth to the central female character. Rinko Kikuchi stands out as a mystical antagonist, radiating menace and otherworldly power. To accommodate Keanu Reeves' presence, the screenplay introduces a half-Japanese, half-European warrior, a character absent from traditional versions of the legend. While this role may not rank among Reeves' career-defining performances, he delivers solid work typical of many action-oriented leads. His physical commitment and restrained style help ground the fantastical elements. Visually, the film is impressive. The cinematography is lush, the costumes are striking, and the battle choreography is carefully staged. Despite its creative liberties, 47 Ronin manages to capture much of the emotional core of the original legend. Yes, purists may argue it lacks authenticity, but those seeking a more faithful version can still find earlier Japanese adaptations, most notably a lengthy 1941 film presented entirely in Japanese with subtitles. One criticism that doesn't apply here is imbalance. If anything, the director leans too heavily into solemnity. Each dramatic beat is treated with reverence, which sometimes slows the pacing. Extended pauses and contemplative moments, while thematically appropriate, may test the patience of Western audiences accustomed to constant motion. Personally, I didn't mind. I have a soft spot for intensely serious, melodramatic Asian cinema, but others may feel differently. During some of these slower passages, I couldn't help but notice similarities to the Magnificent Seven, a band of outnumbered warriors uniting to face overwhelming odds. Of course, that comparison eventually loops back to Seven Samurai, the legendary Japanese film that inspired the Western in the first place. It's a reminder that cultural storytelling influences often circle back on themselves, blurring the boundaries between East and West. Keanu Reeves, meanwhile, continues to defy age in Hollywood. Nearing 50 at the time, he convincingly portrays a youthful hero striving to protect an even younger love interest, and does so largely through practical performance rather than heavy digital trickery. This isn't Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, nor is it Reeves' finest work, and it's unlikely to linger in your thoughts long after the credits roll. Still, it has a certain appeal. The story is rooted in a real historical incident in which 47 samurai avenged their master's unjust death, knowing full well their actions would seal their own fate. In Japan, this episode remains culturally significant, with visitors still paying respects at the warriors' graves. The legend has been adapted many times before, but this stands as the most overtly Hollywood-styled version to date. The inclusion of a Western lead and heavy fantasy elements makes that clear. Mythical beasts, witches, and supernatural encounters push the film far from strict historical drama and firmly into stylized epic territory. Taken on its own terms, 47 Ronin succeeds as a glossy, somber fantasy action film that borrows from a legendary tale while reshaping it for global audiences. It may not satisfy traditionalists, but for viewers willing to accept its imaginative departures, it offers an atmospheric and occasionally stirring experience. Going into 47 Ronin, it's best to leave expectations of historical accuracy at the door. I highly doubt ancient Japan was ever home to dragon sorceresses or towering ogres, so this is clearly not meant to be a faithful retelling of real events. Instead, what the film aims to deliver is fantasy-driven spectacle. Strangely enough, while watching, I kept thinking about Pirates of the Caribbean. The movie carries a similar energy, almost like a Far Eastern cousin to Captain Jack Sparrow's swashbuckling adventures. From time to time, the story shifts into chase sequences or monster encounters, surrounded by large-scale CGI environments that invite us to believe in their grandeur. One thing that surprised me, however, was the limited amount of close-quarters combat. For a movie centered on samurai, I anticipated far more martial arts and swordplay. There are only a handful of duels, which feels like a missed opportunity. Overall, it works reasonably well as a fantasy adventure, but it's difficult to pinpoint who the movie is actually made for. It doesn't contain enough fighting to fully satisfy martial arts fans, and it's not lighthearted enough to be a family-friendly spectacle in the vein of Pirates. It occupies an awkward middle ground, too serious for kids, yet toned down enough that fans of darker supernatural cinema may find it restrained. If you enjoy fantasy action with minimal gore and softened edges, you may still find something to appreciate here. Although Keanu Reeves is positioned as the main attraction, it's the Japanese supporting cast that gives the film its emotional weight. Despite a hefty budget and an international ensemble, 47 Ronin ultimately lands in the serviceable but unremarkable category. A shaky screenplay ends up undermining much of its potential. Story summary. A group of masterless samurai vow to avenge the betrayal and death of their lord, who was destroyed by a merciless ruler. Their quest becomes a long, perilous journey filled with supernatural forces and impossible odds. The first hour of the film feels sluggish, though the second half becomes noticeably more engaging. The action scenes themselves are well staged and visually impressive, with strong choreography and polished execution. Still, they can't fully compensate for the thin writing. The script struggles early on, improves later, but never delivers the emotional punch one hopes for. Carl Rinch's direction is competent but unremarkable. The cinematography does its job without standing out, and the editing is functional. On the positive side, the costume and production design are excellent, and the visual effects are solid. Performances. Keanu Reeves feels oddly distant in the lead role and rarely commands the screen. Hiroyuki Sanada offers a strong and dignified presence, while Ko Shibasaki brings subtlety to her performance. Tadanobu Asano is acceptable, and Rinko Kikuchi does what she can with limited material. There was a time when a new Keanu Reeves release automatically generated excitement. During the eras of The Matrix and Point Break, he was a box office force. I was first introduced to him through the Bill and Ted films, which remain personal favorites. Unfortunately, in recent years, his performances haven't carried the same spark, and this film reflects that decline. I genuinely wanted to enjoy 47 Ronin. Early on, I found myself somewhat invested, but as the film progressed, despite not being slow, my engagement gradually faded. The story is inspired by the famous Japanese legend of the 47 loyal warriors whose master was killed through deception. After years of planning, they succeeded in their revenge and were ultimately granted the honorable choice of ritual suicide rather than public execution. While I have a strong appreciation for Asian folklore, I often feel that Western reinterpretations dilute the mystique of these stories. Not every Hollywood adaptation is a failure, The Forbidden Kingdom, for example, remains highly rewatchable, but many struggle to preserve cultural authenticity. Much like the criticism aimed at The Last Samurai, this film tends to filter a Japanese tale through a Western lens. The filmmakers do attempt to maintain an Eastern atmosphere, and I tried to overlook elements such as the pirate refuge and the inclusion of a half-Japanese outsider protagonist. Still, these choices frequently stretched my suspension of disbelief. Historically, Japan remained largely isolated from the West until the mid-1800s, making heavy Western influences in ancient-set Japanese stories feel out of place. That clash is perhaps the biggest obstacle preventing 47 Ronin from fully working. In the end, 47 Ronin is a visually polished fantasy adventure with moments of excitement, but it never rises above mediocrity. It's watchable, occasionally impressive, yet ultimately forgettable. There's something about Chinese-inspired fantasy storytelling that often feels more cohesive to me than similar attempts rooted in Japanese legend, and 47 Ronin unfortunately reinforces that feeling. One of the first obstacles to immersion is how unmistakably American the production feels. Despite being set in feudal Japan and drawing from a deeply Japanese legend, most of the cast, performances, and stylistic choices reflect Western sensibilities. At times, it seems less like a Japanese story being honored and more like a Hollywood project wearing an Eastern costume. I wouldn't be surprised if many of the so-called Japanese roles were portrayed by actors from entirely different backgrounds, further blurring cultural authenticity. Visually, 47 Ronin is often impressive. The environments, creature designs, and stylized imagery show clear ambition. The film aims to merge classic samurai mythology with modern fantasy elements, and on a surface level, that blend occasionally works. However, strong visuals alone cannot compensate for the movie's deeper structural problems. The narrative moves sluggishly, weighed down by lengthy exposition and extended conversations that stall momentum rather than enrich character development. The core legend, samurai seeking revenge to restore their fallen lord's honor, remains powerful and timeless. Yet the film complicates this simple foundation by splitting its attention between the traditional revenge storyline and an invented personal arc centered on Keanu Reeves' character. Instead of complementing one another, these two threads often clash, leaving the story feeling unfocused. It becomes unclear which journey the audience is meant to emotionally invest in. Reeves delivers a restrained and serviceable performance, but his presence feels strangely detached from the cultural space the film occupies. Surrounded by a mostly Japanese cast, his character never quite blends into the world, creating an awkward tonal gap. This disconnect is further emphasized by performances that frequently feel stiff and overly rehearsed, as though the actors are imitating classic samurai tropes rather than inhabiting real people. When action scenes finally arrive, they are generally well staged and visually striking. Swordplay is clean, fluid, and occasionally thrilling. Unfortunately, these moments are too few and too widely spaced to sustain excitement. Long stretches of slow pacing make the film feel far longer than its already excessive runtime. Some imaginative sequences hint at the creativity behind the project. A haunting spider encounter and certain magical transformations stand out initially. However, repetition dulls their impact. What might have felt mysterious or symbolic becomes repetitive and overly cute, stripping those effects of their original power. The screenplay leans heavily on explanation, often spelling out emotions and motivations instead of trusting the audience to interpret them. This excessive hand-holding weakens tension and undercuts emotional payoff. Important moments that should resonate instead feel oddly flat. Production design presents another mixed bag. While broad visual concepts show promise, many costumes, props, and sets look artificial and lightweight, lacking the texture and craftsmanship expected from a story of this scale. Compared to large-scale Asian historical epics known for massive casts and richly detailed environments, 47 Ronin feels surprisingly small and synthetic. Culturally, the film leans toward Western emotional framing. Traits like jealousy and personal resentment receive heavy emphasis, while the philosophical depth of Bushido, the code of honor at the heart of the legend, feels simplified. The result is a version of the story that prioritizes Western audience expectations over cultural nuance. Even pivotal moments, such as the ritual suicides that define the emotional climax of the legend, are handled with noticeable restraint. The lack of convincing practical effects or meaningful visual treatment diminishes what should be the most devastating and memorable sequence in the entire narrative. It's not difficult to understand why the film earned a reputation as a major box office disappointment. Its ambitions exceed its execution, and its identity crisis half fantasy spectacle, half historical drama, prevents it from excelling at either. Ultimately, 47 Ronin exists in an uncomfortable middle ground. Some viewers may find it tolerable, even occasionally entertaining. Others will view it as a shallow reinterpretation of a revered cultural tale. The tragedy is that the original legend carries enormous emotional and philosophical weight, and this adaptation rarely captures that spirit. What should feel profound often comes across as hollow. At its core, this is a story about loyalty, sacrifice, and moral duty, values that deserve careful handling. While 47 Ronin offers flashes of visual beauty and moments of creativity, it never fully honors the depth of the legend it draws from, leaving the experience feeling long, disjointed, and ultimately disappointing. The movie isn't nearly as terrible as its reputation suggests. At different moments, you can spot shades of 300 in the stylized darkness, echoes of Pirates of the Caribbean in the adventurous set pieces, a faint superhero influence in the visual design, and even emotional traces reminiscent of The Last Samurai. It's a strange mixture, but one that ends up being oddly entertaining. That blend actually makes sense when viewed through a Japanese cultural lens. Japanese storytelling has a long history of reimagining tradition, mixing history with fantasy, sensuality, and mysticism. Films like Makai Tensho have explored this approach before, so the concept itself isn't nearly as bizarre as some critics claim. What feels unnecessary is the insistence that Western filmmakers must treat such material with stiff solemnity. Even The Last Samurai, for all its prestige, was not immune to theatrical excess. Instead, this film leans into spectacle and cinematic fantasy, which gives it a surface-level freshness compared to many recent superhero releases. The colors feel richer, the armor designs more striking, the magical elements more mythical, and the cherry blossom landscapes create a strong sense of atmosphere. Unfortunately, the movie builds toward this heightened fantasy only to pull back and restrain itself in fairly conventional ways. The issue isn't that the film lacks seriousness, it's that it becomes overly earnest about the wrong things. By the final act, the story adopts a reverent, almost preachy stance about sacrifice and honor. Its portrayal of Bushido, the samurai code, is presented with solemn reverence, but this becomes problematic when examined more closely. Bushido itself is a blend of multiple philosophies: Zen's selflessness, Taoist harmony, and Confucian duty, originally rooted in Chinese thought, later formalized within Japanese culture. What defines this narrative as distinctly Japanese isn't simply revenge, but submission to rigid formality. The Ronin complete their mission and then obediently accept punishment, submitting themselves to the same authority that originally enabled injustice. Historically, the law dictated death for drawing a sword in the shogun's palace, a detail acknowledged in earlier versions of the story, but ignored here. There's a reason Bushido was heavily promoted in Japan during the militaristic buildup to World War II, and why some famous adaptations of this tale were commissioned in that era. The danger of rigid formalism is how easily it slips into unquestioning obedience. Even Zen Buddhism was, at times, used to justify war. Films like Seppuku explore this moral contradiction far more directly. In comparison, this movie treats Bushido with a straight-faced respect that glosses over these deeper issues. It ends up being restrained where it could have been playful, and overly serious about ideas that deserve more critical scrutiny. That said, despite being a major box office disappointment and receiving harsh reviews, I've grown to genuinely enjoy 47 Ronin. The narrative isn't perfectly logical, and character development is somewhat thin, but I still found it entertaining, especially thanks to its international cast and fantasy-driven approach. I appreciated that the filmmakers chose to retell a historical legend through a fantasy lens, which happens to be my favorite genre. The movie functions primarily as a visual action spectacle, packed with sword fights, mythical creatures, and imagery rooted in ancient Japanese culture. Director Carl Rinch centers the story on Kai, a half-breed outsider living in the domain of Akko, despised by many, particularly the samurai. When Lord Asano is killed, and his warriors are stripped of their status, their leader Oishi eventually turns to Kai to help carry out a revenge mission. Keanu Reeves is the most recognizable name for Western audiences, and while he's often criticized for limited emotional range, this role suits him well. Kai is meant to be reserved and stoic, allowing Reeves to focus on physical performance rather than expressive acting. Hiroyuki Sanada delivers a strong, grounded performance as Oishi, conveying quiet grief and determination, while Tadanobu Asano brings an effective menace to the villainous Lord Kira. Overall, I found the film to be an enjoyable experience. The visuals are impressive, the action is plentiful, and the script turned out to be better than I expected. Still, the story could have benefited from additional depth and clearer explanations. I would have liked to learn more about the witch's origins and motivations, for example. Given the scale of the production, a longer runtime might have helped flesh out these elements. In the end, 47 Ronin may not reach the emotional or historical weight of The Last Samurai, but it doesn't need to. It succeeds as a fantasy-tinged retelling of a legendary act of loyalty and revenge. While it takes creative liberties, adding romance and supernatural elements, it still loosely reflects the real events surrounding a group of masterless samurai avenging their fallen lord in early 18th century Japan. For me, that makes it flawed, but fun and ultimately worth watching. Compared to the far more famous and critically praised The Last Samurai starring Tom Cruise, 47 Ronin places greater emphasis on an additional narrative layer involving a tragic love story and a strong focus on tradition, loyalty, and personal sacrifice. While the trailer presents the film as a high-energy action spectacle, the actual movie leans much more toward drama, using action sequences selectively rather than constantly. As a result, the pacing is slower than what audiences might expect based on the promotional material, which may catch some viewers off guard. During the climactic battle, the Ronin at times move and fight in a style that resembles ninja more than classic samurai, yet this creative choice adds to the fantasy flavor and visual appeal of the final act. Overall, the film manages to strike a delicate balance between supernatural elements, used sparingly, and a richly detailed period setting that ultimately highlights the strict yet dignified code of honor associated with Japan's Edo-era warrior culture. The cast includes Keanu Reeves, The Matrix, The Day the Earth Stood Still, Hiroyuki Sanada, The Wolverine, Rush Hour 3, Ko Shibasaki, One Missed Call, Galileo, and Hiroyuki Tagawa, Mortal Kombat, Balls of Fury. The story is a fantasy-infused interpretation of the legendary Japanese tale of the 47 Ronin, masterless samurai, seeking to reclaim the honor of their fallen lord. Reeves' character is introduced as a young boy discovered in the forest by samurai hunters and taken into their clan. Although he is trained alongside them, he is never fully accepted, with some warriors labeling him an outsider. A quiet romance develops between him and the lord's daughter, which is also frowned upon. When a power-hungry shogun manipulates events, helped by a dark sorceress, the clan's leader is executed, setting the stage for the Ronin's quest for vengeance and redemption. The film delivers impressive visual effects and frequent sword-fighting sequences. While the conclusion may surprise some viewers, it remains consistent with the long-standing samurai ideals of loyalty, responsibility, and honor. Rated PG-13 for intense violence and unsettling imagery, the movie runs just under 2 hours. I found it enjoyable enough to consider adding it to my Blu-ray collection. Much like The Last Samurai, the film attempts to blend Eastern history with Western storytelling. Visually, it is striking, especially considering it comes from a first-time director. Though inspired by historical events, the story leans heavily into fantasy, supported by extensive CGI. This marks another project for Keanu Reeves that connects him to Asian-inspired mythology and culture, and his mixed heritage appearance fits the character well. One drawback is that none of the filming actually took place in Japan, though modern visual effects convincingly recreate the environment. As is common in samurai narratives, the story does not promise a cheerful outcome. Viewers familiar with the genre will recognize references to ritual suicide and other somber traditions, which give the film a darker tone beneath its fantasy surface. Reeves delivers a solid performance, but certain key moments feel overly stylized in a distinctly Hollywood manner. Traditional Japanese cinematic techniques are largely absent, which may disappoint purists but will likely appeal to Western audiences. Still, the collaboration between American filmmakers and Japanese actors works reasonably well. Ultimately, 47 Ronin lands somewhere in the middle, neither exceptional nor terrible. It is best approached with moderate expectations. The movie was clearly designed with 3D presentation in mind, and its visual spectacle often takes priority over storytelling depth. Beneath the effects-heavy surface, the plot centers on rival rulers, political manipulation, dark magic, and a forced marriage scheme that ignites the central conflict. In short, it's a visually engaging fantasy samurai adventure that offers moments of enjoyment, even if it never fully reaches its potential. The story presents a version of feudal Japan where the former ruler's samurai are outlawed and forbidden from seeking revenge. Among them is Kai, a mixed heritage outsider, half European, half Japanese, who has never truly belonged anywhere. Cast aside by society, he was secretly trained by a mysterious Buddhist order that grants him heightened reflexes, lightning-fast movement, and an unorthodox combat style built around speed and surprise rather than direct confrontation. These disgraced warriors eventually rescue Kai from a grim existence as a prize fighter aboard a ship. They believe his unique abilities, along with his connection to the mystical order, can help them obtain powerful weapons and confront the corrupt new lord. This leads to a final confrontation involving 47 samurai rising against the younger ruler on the very day of his wedding to the former ruler's daughter. From that point onward, the film leans heavily into spectacle. Elaborate visual effects dominate the screen, and the conclusion feels predictable. The shogun ultimately enforces the traditional punishment for defiant samurai, ritual suicide. The camera mercifully avoids graphic detail, focusing only on shoulders and faces, but the implication is clear. One exception is made: the son of the group's leader is spared. The ending attempts to underline the warrior's unwavering devotion to honor, showing men who sought justice, were denied it, and therefore claimed it themselves. Historically, the legend of the 47 Ronin holds enormous cultural weight in Japan. It represents loyalty, sacrifice, and the strict moral code of Bushido in much the same way Shakespeare symbolizes English literature or Charlemagne embodies French legend. This makes the film's creative liberties especially noticeable. Introducing a foreign protagonist, along with witches, monsters, and magical martial arts, transforms the narrative into a fantasy interpretation rather than a faithful retelling. Viewed purely as a fantasy adventure, the movie is fairly enjoyable. The world is often stunning to look at, the action sequences are fluid, and enough fragments of the original legend remain to keep things engaging. However, it struggles in areas that matter most. The script feels thin, and the performances are inconsistent. Keanu Reeves handles the physical demands convincingly, but his character rarely feels emotionally layered. Most of the supporting cast faces the same issue, though Rinko Kikuchi at least leaves a strong impression, even if her performance occasionally goes too big. If the filmmakers were determined to embrace fantasy, it might have been better to push that element further. As it stands, the supernatural aspects feel oddly restrained, present, but not fully integrated. There are creative designs and intriguing concepts, yet few of them actually deepen the story. Despite its shortcomings, I find it hard to completely dismiss the film. It clearly wants to honor Japanese culture, even if it doesn't always understand it. Reeves, in particular, seems sincere in his respect for the material, and that effort shows. The result is a movie that's entertaining, though far from exceptional, worth watching for its visuals and action, rather than its storytelling depth. It's important to note that the real historical account differs significantly. In recorded history, Kira, a court official, allegedly insulted and humiliated Lord Asano by refusing customary guidance and instruction. Enraged, Asano drew his sword inside the castle, an unforgivable offense that resulted in his immediate death sentence. His followers, now Ronin, quietly planned revenge against Kira for nearly 2 years before finally carrying it out. That act of loyalty cemented their place in legend. The film replaces this grounded tale with a largely Americanized fantasy narrative. In that sense, this review treats the movie as a work of fiction rather than a historical adaptation. While some aspects may feel absurd to viewers familiar with samurai culture, they can be forgiven as creative reinterpretation rather than malicious distortion. Other Western films, such as The Last Samurai, have captured the spirit of this world more effectively, but this version remains serviceable and occasionally compelling. One memorable line declares, "I will search for you through 1,000 worlds and 10,000 lifetimes." Yet without the title, many viewers might never guess this story is meant to center on the 47 Ronin. Most of these warriors receive little to no characterization, existing primarily as background figures for large-scale battles. Similar to what 300 did with its supporting soldiers, this approach could have worked if the action were more powerful and the lead performance more commanding. Unfortunately, neither Reeves nor Hiroyuki Sanada fully pulls the audience into their emotional journey. The film looks impressive, but it rarely makes you feel deeply. Final verdict. A visually striking fantasy inspired by a legendary story, but one that sacrifices emotional depth and cultural authenticity in favor of spectacle. Enjoyable as popcorn entertainment, disappointing as a definitive retelling. This hurts the action scenes because we never really care for the outcome of these men. When I first saw the poster for 47 Ronin, I thought this might be a cool movie, but when I watched the trailer, I dropped any expectations I might have had. Not even the cool-looking villains in the poster had much screen time, and every single character in this film is one-dimensional. This was a very dull fantasy film, despite its subject matter, and its 2-hour runtime began to take its toll on me considering it was very poorly paced. The film begins with a prologue, setting up the action, but I really don't know when the prologue ended and when the actual story began because it took forever to set up the plot. It's a shame this film was so poorly realized because first-time director Carl Rinch was given a huge budget to work with. Despite the gorgeous landscape, there was nothing extraordinary about the action scenes, and this is one of those movies that will be quickly forgotten. Screenwriters Chris Morgan, from the Fast and Furious franchise, and Hossein Amini, Drive, based this screenplay on one of Japan's most endearing folktales. The story begins with a prologue explaining the code of the samurai and the feudal situation of ancient Japan. Then we are introduced to Lord Asano, Min Tanaka of Akko, who finds a young half-breed named Kai in the forest and takes him back home. Several years later, Keanu Reeves, who is now a grown man, continues to serve under Lord Asano, helping the samurai led by Oishi, Hiroyuki Sanada, protect Akko from mystic creatures. While hosting a tournament as a welcoming for the shogun in Akko, Lord Asano is bewitched into hurting Lord Kira, Tadanobu Asano of Nagato. Lord Asano didn't realize his actions were induced by a witch, Rinko Kikuchi, who is on Lord Kira's side, and he is forced to take his own life by the shogun. The samurais are punished and disgraced to live as Ronin outside of Akko, and Kai is sold as a slave, while Lord Kira is named ruler of Akko. In order to restore their honor, Kai and the disgraced samurais embark on a dangerous quest to avenge their master's death. I'm sorry if the plot description feels a bit rushed and all over the place, but that was just the way everything was presented in this film. The characters are one-dimensional, and the plot simply moves from one sequence to the next without feeling cohesive. This is perhaps why I felt the pace was so tedious, because we never get any time to actually get to know any of the characters or their motivations. It doesn't matter how beautiful the landscape or set pieces were, the action scenes simply didn't engage me. Everything about this film felt uninspired and dull. 47 Ronin is a disgrace to Japan's classic legend, and I'm sure nobody back home is proud of this film. The critic for Newsday, Rafer Guzman, described this film so well I feel the need to quote him. 47 Ronin would have been more fun if it kept swinging its sword instead of falling on it. Skip this movie. It's not as cool as the poster makes you believe it is. Loyalty and honor in Japanese culture had been very elegantly presented in many films about the shogunate or feudal period of their history. I had always admired the nobility of their Bushido way of samurai life, from watching films like my personal favorite, Ran, to more modern interpretations of the swordsman culture, like Rurouni Kenshin. I think 47 Ronin will be joining that list. Lord Asano Min Tanaka is the master of the prosperous house of Akko. A rival master, Lord Kira, Tadanobu Asano, caused Asano to commit an act of assault by inflicting him with a spell care of his personal witch, Rinko Kikuchi. The shogun Tsuneyoshi, Hiroyuki Tagawa, meted Asano the sentence of seppuku, rendering his band of samurai led by the loyal Oishi, Hiroyuki Sanada, as Ronin. Ronin are samurai who have lost their master. The title 47 Ronin refer to this group of ex-samurai who reunite to avenge the dishonor and death of their master. Among these Ronin is an half-breed of remarkable fighting skills named Keanu Reeves. Despite being considered an outcast because of his skin, Kai's own mystical past will play an instrumental role in their plan for revenge.